All right, let's try that again. Oh, wow, sound. How about that? Who'd have thunk it? I'm so glad you are here with us this morning. Thanks for being a part. Looking forward to our time together, and I want to introduce it by introducing you to a fun little word called an idiom. Okay, so this is what that looks like. Let me make sure I'm on stage here. Idioms are phrases that mean more than the sum of their words. So we're going to talk about an idiom this morning that is the handwriting on the wall. But before I get there, I just want to introduce you to something you may not have known. And that is that the English language has approximately 25,000 idioms. Yeah, isn't that crazy? And by far and away, of all the languages on the planet, the English language has more than any of them. So we use them all the time. You use them all the time. And I wanted just to remind you of some of the ones that you use. And I could have chosen thousands, but I chose 7. Here's the first one. He's just spinning his wheels. Now, we don't have to say a lot about that because how many of you have been stuck in the mud before? And all you did was spin your wheels. So when we say that in conversation, well, he's just spinning his wheels. We all get, and without explanation, that he's stuck in the mud. That guy's got no place to go. He needs help. So that's the first one. Second one is that train has left the station. It's done. It's not. Don't try to resurrect it. It's over. That train has left the station. And we say that ship has sailed. So that's another idiom saying the same thing. Here's one. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. In other words, don't be thinking that, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. That problem may never even surface ever. So don't give it much thought. We'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. Here's another one. The jury is out. No decision has been made. The verdict has not come in. The jury is out. I'm sure that you and I have said that many times. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, basically what we're saying is this. There's good and there's bad in a situation. But don't overreact and throw that baby out, which is good, with the bathwater that's not. And just to give you some idea, I used this one time in a staff meeting because I speak in idiom all the time. And Elena and Losha, who are from Europe, looked at me like, why would anybody do that? So people who are not here in East Texas, and they might hear this and they might go, I just don't get that. But I love idioms. Now, I'll give you a for instance about this one. Years ago, it was maybe 7 years ago, we were looking for a new youth pastor to replace me, and so we put out a nationwide search. And we got candidates from California, from Georgia, what we thought were very qualified candidates until we did further exploration into their resumes, into their lives, and then we recognized that we're fishing in a small pond. We had Rory right here in East Texas among us, and as you know, he is our youth pastor today. So when we say we're fishing in a small pond, you guys get what I'm saying about. So here's the one we're going to focus on today, and it is the handwriting on the wall. Interestingly enough, this idiom originated in the Bible. So it's God's idea to bring about the handwriting on the wall, and we all get that. When the handwriting is on the wall, we can say it's game over. It's done. You can forget about anything else, just prepare for it because it's here, the handwriting on the wall. Now, I want to introduce you to Belshazzar. Now, we've got a store in East Texas called Target. We all call it Target. If we wanted to use the French version of it, we would say Target. But you know what? I don't know anyone in here who calls it that. So if I wanted to give you the highfalutin, what some people call his name, Belshazzar, I could do that. But I'm not gonna. Because we're here in deep East Texas where Bubba and Sissy live, and we all are gonna call him Belshazzar because we never call Target Target. Okay, so Belshazzar is who this guy is, and I want to tell you a little bit about the kingdom which he ruled. You've seen this picture before. This is Babylon in its day, the greatest city on the planet. It had about 200,000 people living in its 22,000 acres. It was a monster city, the biggest of the ancient world. And in this city, they were very, very prepared if anybody were to come against them. As a matter of fact, the walls of the city were 87 feet thick. Just try to imagine that. As a matter of fact, they could do chariot races across the top of them, 4 abreast. The walls themselves were 370 feet high. So imagine you're the enemy army on the outside trying to get in. Because if you were able to get over those walls, you would find yourself in a moat. So you get over and you're in the water. And then there's more walls on the inside. So it's very, very difficult to take this city. And you can understand then why Belshazzar is doing what I introduce to you next. Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. Now, let me tell you what's happening. Outside the city walls are the Medes and Persians. It was Cyrus's army. They had been out there already for 2 years. Now, Belshazzar thought, no worries. I have 20 years worth of food in the kingdom. We can take care of ourselves for 20 years. And the Euphrates River flowed through the kingdom, and so they had plenty of water. And so he's saying, let's throw a party. Let's get together and have a big time. And this is what he did. While he tasted the wine, and that might be his first problem, because sometimes when we taste the wine for too long, we can make some bad decisions. And I think that's what happened here. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem. Oh, look here. Here are the gold and silver vessels. Did you know that, thank you very much, that Ezra, he's in the Bible and he's a prophet, he told us that there were over 500 articles taken from the temple in Jerusalem, used in worship, that were taken to Babylon. And so I can't, this is speculation. I'm in my glorified imagination thinking, how did this come about? Well, I think Belshazzar drank a little too much wine. And he's probably thinking, I need to liven this party up. You know what? I think I'm going to get the temple's treasures that my father Nebuchadnezzar stole or kidnapped from Jerusalem, and we're going to have some fun with these to liven this party up. Conjecture, probably, maybe, I don't know. But that might be what happened. So here he is calling for these instruments that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Now we're talking several thousand people who are at this party, while the enemy is outside at the gates. Now, let me clear something up, because it says Belshazzar and his father Nebuchadnezzar. It's actually his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, but the Bible does this all the time. And you'll get it when I sing you this little song that a lot of us grew up to. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Okay, don't ask me to sing again. But you get it now. We call Abraham our father, and that's what's happening here. He was actually, Belshazzar was his grandson. His father was Nabonidus, who was off in Saudi Arabia trying to conquer more land for Babylon. So that's what was happening. He was the second man in charge, and I want to show you what happens next. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. This is perhaps what it looked like. Here's Belshazzar, lots of people around him, I'm sure drinking too much wine. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And here's what that looked like, or what we think it may have looked like, an artist's rendition of that. Now you can just imagine what's going on in his mind when he sees this. A hand, just a hand, writing on the wall where all can see. Now, I love the Bible and its description of what happened in the life of Belshazzar. Then the king's face grew pale. I can only imagine. You can imagine the blood draining from his face because he's watching a hand writing on the wall. It doesn't stop there. And his thoughts alarmed him. No telling what he was thinking in that moment. It would be interesting to know. And his hip joints went slack. Okay, now that's an interesting way to say it. I did some study on that, and some have said that the Bible was, in a very nice way, that he soiled himself. That was possible, right? That could have happened. So far, and watch what happens next. And his knees began knocking together. So this man is terrified. I practiced the knee knock. I think, put that with perhaps soiling himself, the blood draining from his face, and his thoughts alarming him. And this is one scared guy. As a matter of fact, if you're a kid in here today, I want you to tell me who this guy is. Yeah, Scooby-Doo. And when Scooby-Doo is scared or he's frightened, what's he say? Yeah, you guys got it. Ruh-roh. I think this is what Belshazzar was saying. Ruh-roh. I am in a world of trouble right here, right now. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. King had no idea what was going on. He could not read the writing. He didn't know what it meant. So he called everybody important before him to say, I need you to tell me what this says. That passage says they weren't able to do it. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. Notice Daniel was careful to say it ramped up because they couldn't interpret the saying on the wall. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. No one knew what to do, had no clue, because this was a scary moment. The queen spoke. Let me tell you who she probably was. This could have been the queen mother, and that is going to be Nebuchadnezzar's wife. Nebuchadnezzar's already left the scene. He's already died. Could be his wife, or it could be Belshazzar's mother. But she recognized there's panic in the room. I need to get down there and help them, tell them what to do. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. I read that and I thought, wouldn't it be great if people recognize that about you and me? Man, there's a guy that walks with God. There's a guy that is in touch with the Spirit. And it's just obvious about him. And she knew that to be true of Daniel. Now, remember, Daniel is an old man by now. He's in his mid to late 80s. So he's been around a long time. Matter of fact, he was instrumental in the life of Belshazzar's grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. But I think he's been put on the shelf and forgotten about. And so he wasn't the first one called. But the Queen Mother remembered him and said, hey, you need to touch base with this guy because I think he can help you. And in the days of your father, Nebuchadnezzar, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. You got to get this guy. He's right here in your kingdom. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. And that's exactly what happened. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now, when I read this, I thought, really? Really? Are you humiliating Daniel right here? Hey, are you one of those slave boys that my grandfather brought from Jerusalem? Are you one of those guys? And I'm thinking to myself, this is not a good idea. This is not helpful. But I read that and going, wow, his elevator didn't quite go to the top. That's an idiom, by the way. Now, here's his offer. If you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple, have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. He could offer that because he was second ruler in the kingdom. His father Nabonidus was first ruler in the kingdom. So this was a legitimate offer. He could say to Daniel, hey, I will make you the third guy in charge if you can tell me what this says. And I absolutely love how Daniel responded to him. Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. Daniel says, I don't need anything you have. You can have everything that you're offering to me. You can keep it for yourself or give it to somebody else. Not interested. But I'll tell you what the writing says. And boy, did the table was set. That's an idiom, by the way. The table was set for him to say to Belshazzar what he is about to say. It's just brilliant. O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, which means you can do anything you want. That's what sovereignty means. Grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father. In other words, he gave it all to your granddad. No one before or after him has been so amazing. No world leader has experienced what your grandfather did. God gave that to him. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne and his glory was taken away from him. Bob's been talking to us about that very thing. He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of beasts, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven. And this happened for 7 years. This is what it perhaps looked like for Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man on the planet, to eat grass like a cow for 7 years. And God did that. As a matter of fact, he even warned Nebuchadnezzar that he was going to do that if he didn't cool his jets. That's an idiom. If he didn't come around to the place where, hey, God is just allowing me to be the guy right now. And that was going to happen until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets it over whomever he wishes. This is such an important verse to you and me right now in 2020, because in less than 100 days, a lot's going to happen in an election that we're watching very closely, right? But watch this. The Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and he sets it over whomever he wishes. God's in charge. We don't need to be afraid or scared, because the one that God wants in power is going to be in power. That's hard to take in, isn't it? Because we want what we want, and whether that happens, we have no control over it, really. We have a vote. I'd like to say it this way. The world rulers are pawns on God's chessboard. He moves them however he wants. And I'm going to show you a passage here in a little bit that further testifies to that. But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart. And I love this next phrase. I even capitalized it so we could take it in, the enormity of it. Although you knew all this. You knew this. You knew about your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar and that episode for 7 years where he ate grass like a cow. This is not new news to you. I would love to know everything Daniel said. I'm sure he left a lot out. As a matter of fact, and I'm in my glorified imagination thinking, what if Belshazzar called him Papa? Okay, and he could just come in pretty much whenever he wanted to, right, into the throne room. Hey, Papa, tell me that story about how you ate grass like a cow again. Tell me what it was like. Did it like taste good? I mean, you can just imagine a child asking those questions. What did you have to, why did that happen? And I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar said, let me tell you something. God is God, and beside him there is none else. Our kingdom worships idols and such, and they're not even for real. But let me tell you, this is for real. He told me it was going to happen, and it happened. And no doubt this little boy, Belshazzar, had access to all of the magicians and the astrologers and the soothsayers and all the wise men, and maybe he even got to talk to Daniel. What if that were the case? What if Daniel said, I want to tell you the story about your granddad. It's hard to hear, and it's tough. I get it, but listen carefully, because if you get proud, then God is able to humble you. He knew all of this. And yet, maybe the wine was speaking a little too much to him that night, or maybe he just wanted to make a splash at the party and get everybody's attention for the wow factor. I don't know. But when he called for these instruments and he started pouring wine in them, that was not a good choice. Watch what happens. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. That was not a good idea. You bragged and you wanted to see what all your people would think about this, and I'm sure they thought, wow, that's a moxie move. That's a brave thing you're doing. Are you kidding me? And all of the above. And here's what he did. They brought the vessels of his house before you. These are all the temple articles from Jerusalem. And you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. You've been learning in these past weeks about some of the Babylonian gods. There's Aku, and there's Bel, and there's Nebo. And here's one you haven't heard of, I don't think yet. His name is Marduk. Very prominent god of Babylon. And does this image look like it can hear or see or know? It's an image. It's made of wood, or it could be made of stone, or it could be made of gold even. And they worshiped this, and this is what they were worshiping when they were drinking wine from the articles in the temple. And they were praising gods like this, and not God who we praise and who we acknowledge this morning, Jehovah, Israel's God. And Daniel told him about that. I'm confident that Daniel had opportunity to share with Belshazzar these kinds of things because he knew all this. The Bible's clear about that. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all of your ways, you have not glorified. I love that passage. It's very descriptive. I want to talk about it here in just a minute. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Wow. That's a phrase we've read and heard often. You wanna go there and do that? You want to be a part of what happened back there? If you don't learn from what happened to your father Nebuchadnezzar, then you're just doomed to repeat it. And he did. This is a very true truth. And here he is, an old man now in his mid-80s, speaking to Belshazzar about the handwriting on the wall. This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Remember, they're outside the city gates. So that night, the battle of Opis, O-P-I-S, the battle of Opis occurred, and the Medes and Persians diverted the water from the Euphrates River and were able to go underneath the sleuths and take the city without firing a shot. That's how they took Babylon that night. Well, everybody who was anybody was at the party. They weren't thinking about this happening for sure. But that night, Belshazzar mocked God. And that's never a good idea. And so that night, watch what happens. Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius, who was about 62 years old, took over and began ruling the kingdom of Babylon. And I'm told through historians that the people of Babylon clapped as the Medes and Persians came in and took their city because Belshazzar was such a bad king. And they were happy that the regime change happened that night. It's a fascinating story. It's all history for us right now. But there's several principles that bubble right up to the top, and I can't wait for us to visit with you about them. God is in complete control of world events, even all things politics. I'm going to remind you of the passage that I just showed you. The Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. God's in charge of world events, especially politics, and he is going to bring about what he wants, and especially in terms of his kingdom coming. That's the ultimate goal here, is that the kingdom comes, that Christ is installed as the King of kings and Lord of lords. So whatever he has to do to make that happen is what's going to happen. And even to the point where he moves in a king's heart. Watch this. The king's heart is in the Lord's hand, and like the rivers of water, he turns it whichever way he pleases. Now, I've always been fascinated when I go up into a plane and I look down and a river that I always thought ran straight. Doesn't always run straight, does it? You look at that thing and it might go like this, and that river might go anywhere. And he uses that illustration to talk about how God moves in the heart of kings to accomplish whatever God wants to accomplish. And so whenever you go up into a plain and you watch a river and the turns that it makes, think of this passage, because God does that in the hearts of men. And he does that in our hearts as well. If you ever want to change a person, ask God to do it. He's the one that works in the hearts of people. And this verse testifies to that. Principle number 2, God holds our breath in his hand and owns all of our ways. Have you ever thought about how many breaths you've breathed or how many you have left? That's a powerful thought. What if today was you drew your last breath? Who's in charge of that? God is. It's not you, and it's not me. God's in charge of that. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us that he has numbered our days. God knows when that number is up. He owns all of our ways. Ownership. It's his. It's not ours. And the sooner we recognize that God is God and we are not, it's going to be a good day for us, because we recognize that, hey, God is God and I am not. And I don't need to make this happen because that's his job. Here's another principle that bubbles up to the top, and I am, this one's a little spooky, actually. We are responsible for what we know. Now, I'm going to say something, and I'm going to repeat it. I'll say it again after I say it once. You, people of Cypress Valley Bible Church who have been here for any length of time, have forgotten more about the Bible than most people will ever know. Is that a scary thought? You, people of Cypress Valley Bible Church, have been so well taught that you have forgotten more about the Bible than most will ever know. Guess what? You're responsible for that. You will account for that. There will be a day called the judgment seat of Christ where you will account for what you've known, what you've been taught. I think it's a great challenge. And I hope that you do also. But it's also a little scary, because have I acted on that which I've been taught? Am I putting into practice the things that I have learned all these years? That's an important thought, because we're responsible for what we know. And certainly Belshazzar was, but we are too. Here's the bottom line. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. That's true of Belshazzar, but it's also true of you and me. As believers, if we've believed in Jesus for everlasting life, we're responsible for what we know. We're responsible for our attitude towards, well, we have a presidential election coming up. Do we really believe that God's in charge of that? We're responsible for that, for the truth that we know to be true about that. I want to tell you what I do about the judgment seat of Christ, because this is going to be true of us as well. You're going to have two attitudes, I think. I'm going to put the cookies on the bottom shelf here, okay? That's an idiom, by the way. Real low where you can reach them. On that day, you're going to be mostly sad or mostly glad. Mostly sad if all that you've been taught you haven't acted upon, or the things that you know to be true about the Bible you haven't followed through with. They weren't especially important to you. They were just, well, something I learned on Sunday morning, but real life happens on Monday. So if it isn't a part of who you are, how you think, if you don't value what God values, and if what God thinks is important isn't what you think is important, then you're going to be mostly sad. Will you be in the kingdom? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that's based on believing in Jesus for everlasting life. But I want you to think about just that one truth we just mentioned. How many people think that you got to be good to get there and don't understand the principle that you know about? Salvation is free, discipleship is costly. That's huge, isn't it? What if you just kept that to yourself and you just tucked it back into, I learned that one day, and you never tried to help someone else come to that understanding and realization of that such an important truth? So, will you be mostly sad or mostly glad? Now, this is how I want to help you. It's because I can honestly tell you that I think about the judgment seat of Christ almost every day. Why would you do that? Because it determines how you spend eternity. Because that's the place where you answer to God for all that you've been taught, all that you've done, and you want his approval on that day, mostly glad. Will there be things that are going to be burned up? Absolutely. There'll be a fire in front of me, guys, and I'm going to be sad watching the things that I've done in my own energy, my own flesh, be torched, burned up. That's going to be a sad moment. But what I really, 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 really want to hear is, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful, watch this, in a few things. Talk about grace. You've been faithful in a few things. I will make you ruler over much. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Those are the words you most want to hear on that day. I'm telling you, I can guarantee that's what you most want to hear. And I hope you will, that you'll be mostly glad on that day. And you will be if you keep this bottom line in mind. God is not mocked. Not for the believer or for the unbeliever. Whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. So when you pillow your head tonight, or when you wake up tomorrow morning and you're praying that the kingdom comes, you're praying about the judgment seat of Christ, because that's part of it. That's part of it. So that's how I remember every day to think about my appointment with Jesus. I have one, and I don't have you there to help me. I got to do it by myself. I will answer to him. But so will you. And I want that experience to be mostly glad. So, bottom line this morning, God is not mocked. Ask Belshazzar. Whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. Next week, a special treat is in store for you, because our own Jim Lynch is going to share a passage from Luke chapter 7 called Fully Known. And I want to tell you something about Jim Lynch. Many of you don't know him, but those of you who do know him know this about him. He probably is about the best encourager I know. Isn't he? I mean, you just feel good about being around this guy, because he's going to encourage you. And next week, you're going to hear his story, and he's going to share with you this passage in Luke chapter 7 about fully known, and you are going to be encouraged. You're going to walk away going, I need to know that guy even in a greater way. So he shares with us next week. I can't wait for you to be here. Let's close our time together in prayer. Father, thank you that you have already told us that we have an appointment with Jesus. That's something that the people of Cypress Valley know about. It's not something that we can plead ignorance on that day and in that moment. We've been taught, we've been well taught, and we recognize that we're responsible for the things that we know. And I pray that on that day you would find us, this group of people here this morning, mostly glad. We really, really want to hear well done. And I pray that everything we do today and every day following would contribute to that. And you're so gracious because we're not praying that we get what we deserve. We're all praying for mercy on that day. And you've told us to do that if we are merciful in this life, mercy will accompany us on the day and in the moment we stand before Jesus. So I pray for mercy for each of us. And I pray that you'd find us faithful because you, in fact, are faithful in and through us. And for how you'll answer, we'll give you thanks. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for coming.